All righty. It is great to have this group. I'm going to launch in with a few questions and, again, start playing with the app. We'll get your questions loaded up and start taking a look at them. What I want to do is throw it out here, and Peter, I'm going to pick on you from the get-go. You know,
it's not fair.
You were talking about a lot of improvements that you see, yes, to 2035. I want to bring it back next 5 years. What kind of cost reductions do you think we can get on the O&M side in the next 5 years? What percentage, how much, what kind of reductions, cost reductions, improvements can we get in the next 5 years? Give me a number, give me a scale.
Can we have Keith and Jason go first, and I'll just say more?
More than that.
No, okay. So I think, at least I always used to look at it this way when I was at Upwind, which was it felt like the pricing in O&M was going down year over year quite significantly. And I think that to a large extent that was driven through competition as opposed to necessarily us just figuring out how to do it better. And so I think there was room for that. And then I think probably, at least for me, it felt like probably about 1 to 2 years ago, we kind of reached the bottom of that sort of curve in terms of just, let's just say, aggressive procurement approaches being able to drive that. And then we've gone into this next phase, which is figuring out truly how do we have less techs on a site? How do we have different staffing models? How do we extend outages or intervals, between outages and stuff like that? So I think we're just really at the beginning of that cost reduction curve. And probably if we said there was a 20 to 30% downturn in pricing. I'm not talking overall cost of electricity. I'm just talking purely on the OpEx side. If we peg at about 20, I think that's probably what we need to be looking at in the next 5 because of the other challenges that I talked about this morning, which is price compression, PTC goes away, and major correctors is something we have to go fix.
So over the next 5 years, roughly 20% cost on the O&S side of things.
I think that has to be the goal. And I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but I think that has to be the goal. Yeah. For the
other people's reaction? People agree 20% doable, too excessive, not excessive enough?
I was going to say 21.5%.
Keith.
Nice.
But actually, not so much on the labor side. I think, as Peter said, we've really pushed labor down quite a bit. And I think on the margin, there was a way to bring in, swing staff to come in and maybe do scheduled maintenance and leave. And I think a lot of that's been done. My 20-ish% was really focused, again, where I think a lot of other industries have focused, and that's parts. I think you really have to focus at finding better parts, cheaper parts, substitutes. I think the original equipment manufacturers, don't want to hear that, haven't been there. Some of the margins are pretty good on that stuff, as they should be. They made the investment in technology, they made an investment in putting these things together, and they should be rewarded for that. But over time, that cost curve on the parts side has to come down. 20% in 5 years, 21.5% 5 years is doable. I think over 10 years, which I feel more comfortable with, because I think it's going to take collaboration to get there with all of us. You could see 30, 40, 50%.
Other reactions? Chris?
I'll add to that. We saw it in some of the presentations this morning. I think rather than cost of O&M, I think cost of energy is the right metric to be looking at. And getting those next couple of points of energy-based availability and continuing to put modifications in the turbines so that they are producing more and more and more when they're running. I think that helps make that 20% goal very achievable.
Good. Other reactions? David or Jason or Greg?
I'd like to talk to Peter about getting a 20% reduction in the contract I'm currently working with you on.
It's breaking up, and I can't.
I think that's a great target. Certainly that would be definitely appealing to us to be able to sort of budget for that kind of downslide. I think for us, our challenge is because we haven't added new technologies into our fleet in some time. Our issues are kind of, I'll call them unique, but not necessarily unachievable in that we've got older technology or more maturing technology, I'll call it, and a lot of the cost savings, at least I've seen, are being driven more on the new platforms that are coming out in terms of scaling the size. So the question is can you take the savings that you're being able to justify on a 2 to a 3 megawatt machine and then translate that down to a 1 megawatt or 1.5 and see that sustained.
So I think it's interesting because there is a lot of talk about transparency, and it certainly is, when I was an ISP, it's something I talked about and pushed a lot. And I do think that there is movement there on the OEM side, and I think it's quite significant. And then I think we'll see, there's a lot of talk about it, and then we'll see if the say-do ratio is really, 100% or not. But I think it's going that way because it has to. But it also is, I think it would be fair to say, it's a two-way street, right? So when we're having discussions right now with owners that facing to sort of the pressing challenges of no PTC, or even in some cases a PTC but I can't use it, price compression, concerns about maintenance costs, the only way that I see us resolving those particular challenges is it has to be a two-way street on transparency, which is not just the OEM or the service provider recognizing what they can do and putting stuff on the table. It's got to come the other way too, with an owner saying, hey, here's what I'm dealing with, here's the reality of my world, here's my pro forma, right? How do we work together to solve that? Because if it's just hey, just give, it's not going to end well. So that to me is again, if we talk about things that are doable, it's got to be a two-way
Let's
street.
explore further where we're going to get these reductions, which is part of what you touched on then. And previously, you were mentioning labor. I think, Keith, you talked about parts. Other thoughts about where, let's go with the 20% over the next 5 years, where we're going to get that 20%? What are the other ways you see of getting that? You were also talking process. It's part of a dialogue between the provider, the service provider, and the OEM. But thoughts on where in the cost chain, if you will, we're going to get that 20%? Other thoughts? Jason?
Yeah, I mean, Tom, from my perspective, a little bit on piggybacking what Chris said, I think it's great to focus on cost. And GE, we're absolutely focused on the cost as well. But in addition, we're also focused on the revenue side. We certainly understand that performers are set once you achieve your financial close and you go COD. And as a result, everyone's trying to squeak out and continue to gain, accretive gains to the old performer that was done sometimes 10 years ago. So we feel like not only do we have to work on the cost, but we do have to work on the revenue side as well. And giving you more energy is a significant way to boost your returns. I mean, if you look at a % of decrease in your OpEx cost versus a % increase in your AEP, you'll find that your returns can be 4 to 6 times greater by focusing on the AEP side. And so I appreciate we're focusing on the cost, and it's an important topic, but I don't want to lose the fact that increasing the revenue is very important.
And how are you thinking of doing it? Not to go too much into commercial on the GE front, but on the revenue side, what's your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, on the revenue side, I mean, the industry has seen it, right? We've powered up over 14,000 turbines so far around the world, and that's basically increasing the output of the machines that currently exist. And we're continuously building in new technology, investing in different ways to do that from a controls perspective, from a technology standpoint. As we build out new units, we're focusing on the AEP side and trying to make the most efficient turbine, in the marketplace.
Good. Other thoughts on where we're going to get, whether it's revenue increases, cost cuts towards the 20%? Any other reactions?
I'll touch on supply. Somebody mentioned supply chain earlier, but it is a big one. Those that have the GE 1.5 machines, one of the great things about it is there's lots and lots and lots of those machines, a really big market, so a very competitive parts chain. And I'm not sure if there's any more turbines outside of that model that I would say that about. And so how do we get that kind of robustness in the supply chain, particularly for fleets that aren't as large? How do we get suppliers interested in that and get competition in that space? I know we had one technology we looked at, and there was only one guy on Earth that made that gearbox, and he wanted $650,000 for that gearbox. And we're like, my goodness, 6 times what it might cost you somewhere else. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities there.
Good.
It's an interesting thought there, Chris, because if you think broader, though, and go global, there are plenty of fleets that are as big, if not bigger, right? So maybe that's another piece of the equation here is that we've got global OEMs, so how are those global supply chains being leveraged to benefit projects here? Repowering might be another interesting
On the
thing
list.
too, right? Yeah, okay, I'll hold off.
No. David, did you want to jump in?
I wanted to echo a point that Greg made in his presentation about how the utility model in terms of looking at critical spares and developing relationships, and Keith and I talked a little bit about it too, the importance of how the industry's got to get whether it happens by consolidation or acquisition and all of the companies become smaller, or the fact that if we're going to continue to have this many companies, there's got to be cooperation in terms of sharing major components, particularly on the BOP side. We're experiencing some real challenges around, replacing pad mounts in a respectable amount of time. And, those are kind of things that'd be nice to be able to rely on a partner or another industry entity that could help us out in that respect.
And Tom, I think that's where the risk side of this equation can't be lost, right? So power up, other things like that, certainly on the revenue side are important to look at. But, if you're down for a certain amount of time because of parts availability or other reasons, that certainly can just, on a dollar per, KWH can just eat you up completely versus all the other almost offensive things you do. Sort of that play and defense thing I think is important. And so back to sort of data-driven analytics right now, sometimes we'll pay a lot in our O&M budget to try to de-risk something. But I think historically we've sort of done that with people who maybe had a good, we thought, pitch or approach or technology or whatever, and not necessarily we're really de-risking it more as much as we might thought, right? You're maybe paying a lot for that premium. So I think that is a broader analytics sort of data thing that we've got to get to. I mean, this is where probably prior criticism of OEMs, clearly their recommendation on how to think about critical spares, how to think about replacement cycles is partly driven on the data and partly driven on, parts revenue, right? And so I think we've got to continue as an industry to think about it in that owner mindset, what is really the best, what's the right risk tolerance, and that might be where some of I think there'll be continued migration into clusters of owners that will think about this similarly, right? And so there will be certain risk profiles that you already see today with people who might take more merchant risk than non, or you might be able to take a little more operational risk than not, geographic, all that kind of things. So I think that's where we can have subscale within the broader scale is getting those groups together, I think in a way, and that might be the walk before we run on the collaboration thing is, okay, you've got some common problems. It's what Chris and our team are working together because we've got some Mitsubishi stuff to try to sort of work through and solve. And I think those will be more examples of that to foster then a more
Well, let's run with what you're talking on the de-risking and the role of big data. So are you guys seeing returns on your investment on big data? I mean, are you putting a bunch of money in, you say, whew, that was money well spent, whether it's in gathering the data, parsing it apart, software programs, prognostics. Thoughts on big data? Keith, you look like, do you have a thought there?
Yeah, we are seeing returns, but not really the way big data is talked about at the moment. I would argue that CMS is a big data. Back in the 90s, to monitor 2 channels of a vibration sensor took a machine that cost $60,000. Now that's been driven down, and something that was, very manual is now very automated. So there's tons of time series and data sets and masks you put on there to automatically figure out what's going on in these turbines so you can be better prepared. So I'd argue that CMS is a subset of big data. And we made a decision at Eon a number of years ago to retrofit all turbines to make sure they had this data, or they had this more predictive type technology so that we can get a better handle on unscheduled maintenance, planning, spares, contractors, what we're going to need, not need. We saw some good value out of that.
Good value. Other experiences? Chris?
Yeah, I'll say we're a big believer in it, and we have seen some big benefits. I think one of the most important investments is in people that are really into data analytics and really into crunching numbers. It's amazing when you get all your data together in one place and have smart people play with it, the things they can come out with. So it's not quite what the commercials make it sound like, but I think a good example of that I think most people in the industry don't really know how their turbines are operating. I think you think it's doing one thing, but you start looking at it a little closer and gosh, it's curtailing this way or it's pitching the wrong way, and it's not at all obvious from most of the tools we all use, and it takes really diving, looking at that stuff smarter to say, hey, these turbines are not operating the way they should, and with some, in most cases, free adjustments, we can recover a lot of production. So.
Yep. David, you mentioned you've got an older fleet. How are you experiencing, the use of big data, and how's it working for you?
I don't think we've spent enough, and we certainly haven't spent enough on people to analyze what data we are collecting. And like Chris has pointed out, I have started seeing some things that really shocked me when we did start applying some of that data to looking at our production curves and, seeing as many turbines underproducing as some of them were overproducing, and asking the question, why is it overproducing? And how is that having an effect on my long-term maintenance? Is that why my pad mounts are failing? I mean, I'm kidding a little bit, but that's really the questions we're asking ourselves. And the thing is, just looking at that little data set is like made us say, wow, we need to invest more in the people to extract that data. So I'd say we're a little bit maybe behind the curve in how we're utilizing big data, because our turbines don't have CMS, and so we're just pulling stuff out of SCADA. SCADA can be, somewhat unreliable at times, so you have to be careful about what data it is collecting. So I think we're trying to find the right big data solution for us, and there is one out there. I think it's just a matter of, one, committing to the people to do something with the data that we're collecting.
I think this is one where it does take a big investment, Dave, you're right. So we can't be short-arm. I would argue for us, we've seen real wins, but we're not using it to its full advantage yet, right? So we've got, I think, part of the issue is, even beyond the people, is the system side, right? Because you're going to, Peter talked about 60 million sensors, I think. That was just sensors, let alone 60 million times take your interval sort of math times every day, times every year. All of a sudden, you've got a ton of data. So we are already seeing the fact that we've got to invest faster on how you collect, manage, and react to that data, because you can't hire enough people, and the cost won't let you to sit there and more manually go through that to try to find those engineering insights. And then I think the second piece is getting the full team engaged on that, because while we can see now, even one subset of big data, just work management systems, right? A big standard deviation between, maybe a certain job that might be similar from site to site. And it's not a matter of, the old industrial engineering of sort of doing a, time and motion study and beating on the person who's at the low end of that curve. It's sort of figuring out, well, okay, what is driving those times, looking at the data side of it, and then going out and trying to help them be more successful. So that's, I think, a couple of things that for us, we've seen enough wins, but to say it's definitely going to have high value, but it's also going to take a collective investment that the system side is going to be important.
Yep. Specifically on prognostic software.
It's a fact of life, though, right? I mean, I think that we talk about big data, and I remember having a discussion with guys at Microsoft, and they rather embarrassingly said to me, Peter, it's just data. It's not big or small or tiny, it's just data. And the fact of life is there's a ton of data out there, and it comes down, I think what Greg's talked about is the investments in infrastructure that allow you to collect the data, and there isn't a single sub-segment of the market which is a whole bunch of big data guys, right? So the way that we should think about it is, what investments do I make in my infrastructure that allows me to collect data, right? What investments do I make in tools that allow me to analyze? What investments do I make in reporting capability? You put the Nest up earlier. That's probably, I love the Nest report I get every month from home. It's that piece of it then, that how does that then go back into the field or into the customer's hands? And so I think there's at least 4 subsegments of that big data space, which is the data collection, the analytics, the reporting, and the field application. And every one of those probably has at least another dozen subsegments. So it's not a simplistic big data at all. It's a fact of life, and we just have to break it down in a methodical way and go about it.
We talked earlier about who owns the data. Let me give everybody else a chance. Comments on who owns that data? OEMs? Jason?
I mean, to me, that's like a 4-hour discussion. I think everybody owns the data. I think everyone can benefit from the use of the data, right? And I think that's where we focus from. From a standpoint of, data is a huge, big, opportunity. I mean, in GE and Wind, we've kind of probably underwhelmed it publicly, but we're investing a lot of dollars into it, right? And other than our, GE commercials about, hammers, which, I'm not a big fan of or anything like that, but we do recognize as a space. It's a big way and a big opportunity, a big lever to achieve those cost targets, cost out targets that we're trying to all achieve in the industry going forward. So I think the data in general is useful to everybody. And I think as an industry, we got to figure out a way to be able to, the keywords that we've been using all morning, collaborate and work together to try to figure out how to, achieve those gains for the industry together.
Perfect. Other answers to this 4-hour question? Who owns the data?
Simple framework, I think, Peter certainly, I think the asset owner probably has the best claim on it and owns it, but I think I agree the more important discussion is who needs it, right? And I think clearly all of this is just heavily contracted business, right? So it's the customer contract, customer with our contract with your providers, certainly whether it be around turbine performance, site minimums, et cetera, all those pieces are in there. So I think the big thing is how do you best use that on who needs it, have a framework, I think to get better and better about how we go through that and not, you said, get to a meeting and it's sort of, I've got my stuff on this side of the table and you've got yours and there's a fight about it, because I think that's one where we agree. We've had the most headway where it's been, I think, open. There's always going to be a difference of opinion or different assumptions I think that each side's going to have, and that's back to this clustering of like-minded, I think, players in the industry. But that, I think, clear on who needs it and then figuring out how to work through that has to be a sort of a mission of ours.
Good. Any different answers?
One thing I'll add is that I think one of the challenges that was mentioned in one of the earlier Q&As is the OEM's understandable protection of their proprietary technology, and how does that get at odds with that? I was thinking this morning about automotive analogies. Nobody worries if they take their Ford into the Chevy dealership and have them look at the codes off their computer. But is that a different answer if you take a Siemens turbine to Vestas and ask that same question? So it's an interesting question for the industry to grapple with. Where are those boundaries? Great.
Let me come back. I mentioned earlier prognostic software. Experiences, who is using different type of software on the maintenance front? Any experience?
We've got a bunch, and I know that we, two hats, I guess, the Upwind hat and the Vestas hat. So the interesting thing about predictive algorithms is they're incredibly data hungry. And so if you trial it and test it on major corrective failures, you typically, it's not going to tell you a whole lot, frankly, unless you have, at least in Upwind's world, which was, hey, we have 3.5 gigawatts of turbines. Well, the new world is, hey, we have 70 gigawatts of turbines. So now there's a whole new world of data. So I think where you have the large data sets that really enable you to feed these algorithms, you probably can get to windows. I mean, we only got to about a point of within 28 days we would know a gearbox would go or a generator would go, and it's not enough. And frankly, I think that we probably had as good, if not better, diagnostics coming out of the condition-based maintenance that we were running, that Keith mentioned. So within the Vestas world, there's a lot more data there and a lot more granularity. So I think that it's there, and it's going to become something that will happen over time as we get more and more data. And these algorithms, the way they work is you tune them, and you figure out which ones to interplay for which type of component. And they don't all work. It's not as simple. They don't all work with every component. So
got it. Other.
ATMs is the one example I was going to bring up. You asked me earlier. So Microsoft are running predictive algorithms on basically a whole fleet of ATMs for a bank, and they've got it to a point where you fire up a dashboard. They know when an ATM is going to go down. They know why it's going to go down and when to dispatch the tech. That's the future. But
good.
massive data sets, right? And we're not quite at that point yet.
Other answers?
Even in a more focused one, one win we've had is, clearly, Jason, GE doesn't make everything that they sell to us, right? And so we've gone through and found stuff you would have thought would have been already in hand, but wasn't, right? And even historically, we would have leaned on the OEM, but basically enough data mining that says, okay, here's a part and has a huge standard deviation on how long it's lasted. And with some drill down, finding out, okay, you can find out some common traits of that when it was made, maybe more importantly, who it was made by, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about, when I'm going to buy that replacement part, I now know I've got a better chance here, as well as if your median failure time was 5 years for a rate, and you've got, in our fleet, some that are already 7+, right, even though some failed at 2, how we get out in front of those other things and more proactively do it is great. So that's enough, in my, sort of almost keep it simple view of that's enough progress that we've shown that I think it's just scraping the surface.
I think
Great.
from a prognostic standpoint, we believe in it. I think there's lots of solutions out there, and I don't think anyone on here on the panel has addressed their experience with those solutions and stuff. And so, I don't want to necessarily, I guess I'll do it, a shameful plug. This is the first time that GE is going to talk about, prognostics, about prognostics, and then taking all that data and what to do with it, right? We're going to talk about that tomorrow in a panel. So, rather than me go through it, please come and take a listen. It'll be the first time we, kind of share our thoughts on it, and I'll get into much more detail.
Great.
GE Predix is going to take over the world, right? It's like, man,
It's cost $5 billion.
With that, let me jump to one of the questions from the audience that a lot of people want answered. What are your biggest frustrations with your installed fleet? Your biggest frustrations? Who wants to start?
Maybe as an just pure operations and not speaking for Vestas at all or for Upwind, just purely thinking about it as an operating leader, it's blind spots. It's the stuff that pops up that you didn't expect. And whether that's in the running of a turbine or safety or quality or something that's happening, there's always stuff that pops up, and you end up asking yourself that question of like, why the hell didn't we know that? And that's probably my biggest one, is those blind spots.
Biggest frustrations? Chris?
One thing I'll add to Peter's, when that happens, it's even more frustrating when gosh, if we had only put X in place a year ago, we would have known about this much sooner, and it's what drives all of us to want to improve those things. I think the other thing that I would say maybe is a frustration is I think too often in the industry we still Band-Aid kind of technical problems and don't really solve them. So, swap that part, get the turbine back in service, but lo and behold, 6 months later it happens again. So really getting to the heart of technical challenges and solving them is, I think, not where it needs to be.
I think that's a good point. The lack of really aiming for that optimization piece, that upper part of the chart that I think Peter had, I had on my piece, is probably a look back that we have to acknowledge. Because of the heavily contracted nature of this business, the OEMs were like, okay, do what was in the pro forma, right? That's what we're holding you to. For the owner's side, let's make sure we manage our O&M budget to that, same or just under that kind of a perspective. And we've missed, I think, a number of things that said, gosh, if you would have just made this investment, that investment, or thought about things a little differently, I think you could have really optimized that outcome, especially 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And that's going to be, I think, back to like data and a broader perspective of hoping the next 5 years we'll learn from some at the last 5, because we certainly have gotten some of that. You make your investment, you promise the board you're going to hit certain returns, and so it's okay, hit that number. And the reality is, by doing so, you've missed some real wins.
Yep. Let me twist the question. Or Keith, did you have an answer to that one?
I did.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think the biggest frustrations for me are as your fleet ages, there's certain problems that are maybe more legacy that people just don't want to deal with anymore. And either you have a model turbine that isn't the most prolific in the fleet, or is an OEM, rightfully so. They've gone from the 1 megawatt class, and they're going to be 3, then 5, and 10, and some of this stuff just kind of gets left in the dust. And it's an opportunity, but it's also frustrating because I think, as operators, we want to squeeze every last bit of production, and a $10 part can take down a turbine just as much as a $200,000 gearbox. Right?
Let me twist the question for the last two folks. What do you worry about most? What keeps you up at night?
I think I've always answered this question the same way. It's safety. I mean, I think, and I probably don't worry about it enough where, there's, 100 people in the field that work for us at any one time. And, I only really appreciate it when I go out and visit the site, and I don't do it enough about how big a risk that these guys undertake every day. And that's why it kind of almost frustrates me the pace at which, the industry is kind of slowly getting momentum around applying, utility scale safety approaches to the wind business, and I'm happy to see that. So I mean, my biggest fear again is just safety from making sure that everybody, you know, goes to work, and I think you said it earlier in your presentation, they actually go home better. You know, not necessarily from a data, but, you know, knowledge perspective, and they feel good about what they do, and they come back and they last longer than the 5-year average. So yeah, safety is definitely for us.
Jason, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I think you know, safety is a great one. You know, as technology continues to grow and turbines become bigger, right? There's more risks as everyone tries to do things faster, right? There's the intense pressure to do things quicker, more efficiently. Maybe carry something instead of using a lift for it. You know, things like that will help the bottom line, but yet compromise safety. So I think that's a huge challenge. And I think, you know, the thing that I worry about the most is, are we moving fast enough? You know, I know we're trying to push ourselves internally as a business to continue to innovate and bring technology to the forefront that, you know, that the industry can benefit from. But I certainly know that, you know, and I think everyone would agree that we can do it faster, you know, as an industry. And so trying to push that forward is something that, you know, on a daily basis, you know, are we going fast enough? Are we doing it the most efficient way? Are we going fast? We're making mistakes, and we have to turn around, go back, and backtrack, and you know, that balance between being accurate and being fast.
Okay, let me go on to a new topic, training. I mentioned earlier, but then I think a couple of folks followed up on the question of whether the industry should try to design some type of standard training protocol or curriculum or certification or accreditation or whatever the scenario is. Thoughts, reactions. Is that a good idea? Is that a horrible idea? People's reactions. Greg?
It's definitely necessary, right? So I know we've just seen it from almost the employee demand side that it's a highly valued piece of it. This is different, as you know, from all the statistics. We've got a fairly young workforce, right? Some of the folks, this is their first job. They may have done junior college or some other thing, technical college to get into this field. And so I think they really, from our experience, really just soak up any kind of training and really put a lot of value on it. So we created our own little Duke Energy Renewables Academy kind of a thing and put them through that. And it's both, here's the company, clearly safety culture and all that kind of basic training, but then some other things about really more technical. And we probably can't invest enough in, beyond their initial cycle through that, what is sort of the continuing education model that makes sense. So we've had a real, just from watching that and the positive feedback that Jeff gets, I get, our team, you know, it's been a huge positive investment. And so I think how we think about that more broadly for those common themes that are going to be across the industry, clearly safety, technology, training, adoption, et cetera, are going to be ones that, you know, can only help us. And I think we have to be candid that some of our folks are going to go work for other people on this stage and vice versa because they're looking for either a geographic shift for their career or a progression or what have you. And so it almost would make all of our lives a little bit easier, I think, if we had that at least common foundation that we could maybe share and leverage.
Other answers? Yes, no, maybe? Peter?
Well, I'm a little closer to it, obviously, with the steering committee, and it's something we're looking at. So I think I think there are very different views across the industry depending on who the stakeholder is. But I think what's interesting to me about it is that conceptually, I think it's a great idea, and it's something that we need to explore. And I think we've, at least with the steering committee on the operations side with AWEA, we've kind of reached this place where I think we're saying we need to really understand, well, what would it look like, and how would you really implement it, and who would want it and who wouldn't, because the reality is Duke, Patton, Aon, GE, Vestas, Upwind, you name it, right? Everybody's built a training program. Everybody's built a tech level sort of certification process and advancement process, whether it's on experience, certifications, you know, job performance measures, whatever you want to call them. The reality is that they're all going to be slightly different. There might be some alignment there, but we're just going through that right now with levelizing Upwind techs with Vestas techs. And at a high level, you might think that, oh yeah, tech level 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all the same. Then they're really not. So I think conceptually it's a great idea. The challenge, I think, for us, Tom, is going to be thinking it through of like, well, how will we really make this work in a way that makes sense for all of these different entities that have already put a lot of time and effort and money into.
And be additive to what the industry has done, not duplicative or what have you. Other answers, other thoughts, David?
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, I think there was, I was reading this weekend something saying, and I think, Tom, you referenced it earlier about how wind techs are kind of one of the most, you know, sought after positions and growth over the next 5 years, and what an average tech makes $48,000 or something like that. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money for an hourly employee, right? And the fact is that that's getting pushed up, right, as we're trying to steal the best talent and instead of developing the broader base. My concern around that is that high salary is it attracts people, and without a standardized program, particularly around electrical safety and electrical worker, you put them in incredible risk, and that makes me sleep less. So I'm really looking for, and I came from the utility world, so I understand the value of the union and the trade kind of approach. When we were owned by the Australians, they were shocked that our guys weren't tradesmen that we hired, that they basically could be, you know, farm hands that we brought in off the street and train them, whereas in Australia, you know, you had to go through a training and you had a card, and, you know, of course that increases costs. So I mean, you've got to balance the sort of issues around how do you manage that growth, but you know, if we can't attract a good base of people and train them well, you're going to run into safety issues, and I think that's the big.
Good. Any different answers?
Well, the flip side is the prequel, isn't it? Because there's I think the obligation of service providers to train their people properly and to have programs, and it would be great if there's a model that the industry shares. But the flip side of this is then the owners making sure that the pre-qual process works.
Yeah.
And then also if you're a service provider and you subcontract, that you also then have an obligation to make sure you're qualifying companies appropriately.
Good.
So there's a
We switch subjects and go to a question from the audience, and I want to exclude big data or the data side of things in answering this question. What tech developments does each panelist want to see happen in the immediate future to make their assets cheaper to run, easier to manage, and more productive? So we covered data, yeah. In addition to that, what tech developments do you want to see?
And anything that reduces crane events, right, further, right? That's the largest nut.
technicians or technology.
Technology. Well, actually, it's what tech. I'm going to go with technology. Interpret it how you want.
I mean, I think Peter had the drone on his slide. I think that's another short-term real opportunity to figure that out. It's got both get the rules right kind of dynamic to it. It's got how do you leverage that technology. But, you know, we saw a company demoing the other day, and they were doing a lot of work with AT&T and demonstrating that these things go up, take 12,000 high-definition pictures, you know, and create a 3D model to help them not only inventory what's up on that pole, but look on the back, and they can say, you know, if there's 3 threads showing on that screw that supports some arm bracket with a cell mode on it, you know, that's good. If it's 1, it's time for maintenance kind of thing. And clearly us with blade inspections, turbine inspections, I think that we are going to have to, there are going to be some nearer term wins than maybe we thought, at least for us, I think for the industry, than we thought maybe in 3-6 months ago.
I think it's, you know, all these things to me roll up ultimately into reliability-centered maintenance, which is old term, aerospace. And that means that can we advance ourselves to a point where we really are adjusting intervals between maintenance activity, right? And then are we really able to, I think it's an interesting challenge when you've got people at a site and the site's running. What are they doing? And so flexibility of how you man projects, cross-training so they can do multiple different tasks and really truly react to what's needed at the site. That's the advance that I would like to see.
Good. Other answers?
I definitely would like to continue to see improvements in blade coatings and technologies that can extend the life of my blades. You know, I mean, they're the classic example of something that, I guess if you take care of them, you could expect 20, 30 years. But I think the reality is, depending on the conditions, they're certainly going to require a lot more maintenance. And I certainly don't want to be put in a position where, you know, I'm having to, you know, manufacture blades when they're not being made anymore. So I mean, that's a real. I think the issue we're going to face is certainly repowering is going to be a much more attractive option than trying to solve the supply chain around where am I going to find a Siemens 2.3 blade.
Yep.
If I go to the production side of things for a minute, I think getting to a better understanding of the wind flow across the rotor disc, which we're almost completely blind to in our technologies today. What's the wind really doing? How do we optimize the turbine for that, both initial selection and how it operates, and similarly, how wake effects kind of propagate across wind farms, and how do we kind of optimize wind farms as a whole? I think there's some fruit yet to be had there.
Let me switch gears. Safety. You guys brought it up here. I know you all care about it. We launched the Stop the Drop campaign this last year. What's the next campaign? What's the next issue on the safety side that we should undertake to try to do an education campaign industry-wide?
Maybe to Keith, sorry. Why don't you go?
I was going to say soft tissue injuries. I think as these technicians get older, climbing up these ladders is very, very hard on these technicians, their knees, the joints. And I think dealing with them proactively, maybe making investments in things. We at Eon, on the operations side, we invested in climb assist for every turbine that was out there that didn't already have something in place. We feel that's good for the longevity of our technicians, their health, safety, overall well-being. A happy technician results in a happy turbine. They're more willing to climb back up and take care of something small if they have an advice such as that before it becomes such a big issue. But people talk about stretch and bend programs and other sorts of things. I think just overall soft tissue type injuries as technicians age, and certainly I feel myself as I age, would be a big help.
Great. Other answers?
I think in electrical safety, and maybe specifically arc flash, is an area I know we're spending a lot of time on right now, making sure we've really understood and characterized those risks, and really have good safe work procedures and training that surrounds that risk. It's one of those things, you don't run into it a lot, but when you do, it's a very, very serious issue. So,
yeah, I think both ends of that spectrum, Chris, makes sense, right? So you've got electrical, sort of our vernacular is around keys to life, right? But I think clearly really focus on those high risks, on electrical fatality things that we've got to make sure that we are addressing and educating, because I think you've got this problem. You've got a bunch of younger, early career, can-do, generally kind of employees that we've got, and they want to go helpful, but that's a whole other world that isn't maybe their expertise, I think, versus up-turbine expertise. And so I think getting that piece, and then the other end of the spectrum we've seen is little stuff, right? That just drives you crazy on recordables and things, but hand cuts, other little things that I think, need to be addressed on how we really continue to get, best practices across different experiences on how we can minimize that, because it just keeping those stats down, on true health improvement for the industry is only going to help us.
So maybe I'll disagree, but violently agree at the same time. How about that? So all those things are great, but if you think about it, they're symptoms as opposed to root cause and getting to the heart of the issue. And the biggest single improvement that I've seen firsthand is when you recognize that there truly are three areas to a great safety program. It's the written program, it's the observation program, and the third vital one is personal safety skills. And I think the reality is that as much as we want to educate on hazards, train appropriately, equip appropriately, you still have to account for the fact that it's an individual that makes decisions that I bet you if anybody here looked at their recordables and root cause, the vast majority, if not all of them, will be human error. Right? Very, very few actually come down to, I had the wrong PPE. Oh, well, guess what? They chose the wrong PPE. It was the wrong tool. They chose the wrong tool. So you've got to somehow get people into, I think, thinking about the decisions they're making. People drive themselves to work, right, Tom? You don't drive them, right? I mean, people make decisions every day. Also, many more accidents happen at home than they do at work. So those, whether it's Safe Start, which is one that I'm familiar with, or other ones, I think those personal safety skill campaigns are vital, and that's probably where my vote would go. If we're going to do something as an industry, we should really drive that home.
Great. Any different answers? Otherwise, I want to switch. Another question from the audience, and this relates to some of our pre-discussion on consolidation in the industry. Yes, no, ISP, OEMs. But the question is, where does the wind O&M services market look like in 3 years? Or what does it look like? Sorry. Players, focus. So what does it look like in 3 years? Peter.
I have some experience. I think that we're approaching an era of service where truly scale is a big advantage in terms of what you can offer and how you can offer it and how you can back it up. And whether it's a transfer of risk and paying a premium for that or not, and being in more of a shared outcome, shared goal type structure, I certainly felt with Upwind that the next wave of where you're going required more scale and bigger balance sheet. And so I think for the most part, at least with how I feel about what's the future of service sort of structures and contracts and how you deliver and how you go after it, I think you're going to need scale, you're going to need balance sheet, you're going to need investment. So I think that changes the landscape a little bit. I think it will push us towards some of the consolidation. That's probably inevitable anyway in any evolution of any industry. But I still feel that there will be ISPs, but whether or not they're national sort of O&M ISPs or more niche players that have very specific capabilities, strong technology in a certain area, I think those guys will still exist, and some of them will be snapped up, and some new ones will pop up. So I think they'll always be out there. I just think that we're going into a new sort of wave of approaching O&M that's going to require different capability set.
Other answers, different answers, 3 years from now? Chris?
I don't know where it's going. I'm a little worried about it. I do think it felt like we were going through a phase of more and more options and people growing and making the business bigger. Feels like we're going backwards a little bit with consolidation. So it's interesting. We're one of those, we may be the biggest owner out there that's not self-performing yet. We probably are. And we're at that precipice of, we had an interesting discussion internally. Maybe we don't really want to go self-perform, but maybe we have to because there's not enough liquidity, not enough options out there to get cost-effective where you need to. So it'll be interesting to see what is the size of that market too. To what extent is there big owners that are doing it themselves in-house versus the market for service providers. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I don't have predictions, but I'm interested.
I think ISPs, like Peter said, will become very niche, very specialized, maybe regional or geographic, and those sorts of things. I think you may see a few more owners get involved, maybe not. I think you just have to look at other industries and how those industries have transformed. As I said before, we're in 10-year of a 100-year industry. A lot of the stuff will be pulled in-house, and I'll extend it beyond 3 years in terms of time horizon. I think you'll start to see certain OEMs make a decision and say, do I really want to be in the $20, $30 an hour technician business, or do I want to start to move into the $300 an hour field engineer business, right? Because people businesses have people problems, and those aren't always easy to deal with. I think as an owner, we're sort of, whether we like it or not, we're in that game, right? We're here for the next 25, 30, 40 years of these assets. We have no choice but to be and understand how to take care of people and drive them to be successful. I think other players will maybe look at that a little bit differently in terms of cost and return. No one on Wall Street gives a big company a premium for having 20,000 people running around out there, making razor-thin margins, right? It's based on, as an OEM, I'm looking at it as a technology play. It's new products, it's new parts, it's coming in with big retrofit packages, big dollar things, relying upon their intellectual property as they should. And I think more of them will probably start to pivot.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have hit the allotted time. Please help me in thanking our esteemed panel. Great discussion. I hope you found it informative.